After the argument with my daughter-in-law over my husband's inheritance, she planned to put me in a nursing home. You just don't understand how inheritance works, Mary, Jessica sighed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany dining table. Richard would have wanted James and me to manage his assets properly. I stared at my daughter-in-law across the table, my hands trembling slightly around my teacup. At 70, I had thought I'd seen it all. But the way Jessica looked at me, like I was some confused child, made my blood simmer. I was married to Richard for 47 years, I said quietly. I think I understand perfectly well what he wanted. Jessica's smile tightened. My son James sat beside her, silent as always when his wife spoke about money. The tension in the room was suffocating. We just want what's best for everyone, Mom, James finally said, not quite meeting my eyes. The conversation is over, I replied, standing up. I need to check my email. May I borrow your laptop, Jessica? There was a flash of something, alarm, in Jessica's eyes before she nodded. Of course, Mary. It's in the study. The study had once been Richard's sanctuary. Now it was filled with Jessica's decorative pillows and scented candles. I sat at the desk and opened the laptop, surprised to find it unlocked. That wasn't like meticulous Jessica. I opened a browser to access my email. That's when I saw them, the tabs Jessica had left open. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Melhores asilos na região e quanto custa. My Portuguese was rusty, but I understood enough. I clicked through the tabs, each one revealing another nursing home, another price list, another amenities package. My heart pounded as I clicked on her browsing history, revealing more searches. How to transition elderly parents, signs of dementia in seniors, legal guardianship process. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had helped James and Jessica with their mortgage for years. I had watched their children 3 days a week so Jessica could maintain her personal time. I had never complained, never interfered. I wiped my eyes and scrolled further. There it was, appointments scheduled with 3 different facilities next week. While I was supposedly visiting my sister, they were going to tour the places they planned to put me. Footsteps approached. I quickly clicked back to the email page, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. Finding everything okay? Jessica's voice was honey-sweet as she appeared in the doorway. Yes, just fine, I managed, amazed at how normal my voice sounded when inside I was screaming. Jessica lingered, watching me. You know, Mary, we've been thinking about your living situation. This big house, all those stairs. It can't be easy for you. I managed just fine, I replied, not looking at her. On the screen, the evidence of her betrayal still lurked just a tab away. Well, James and I were thinking it might be nice for you to have a community. People your own age, activities, care if you need it. I turned to her then, my face carefully blank. That's thoughtful, Jessica. I'll keep it in mind. Later that night, alone in the house Richard and I had shared for decades, I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook. The mortgage check for James and Jessica's house, $1,800, was written and sealed in an envelope. I had never missed a payment, in the 7 years since they'd bought that 4-bedroom colonial. I stared at the envelope, thinking about nursing home brochures and whispered appointments. Then I picked up the phone and called my bank. I'd like to cancel a check, I said, my voice steady as I gave the details. After hanging up, I looked around my empty kitchen. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves had betrayed me. I had thought I was helping family, building a legacy of love and support. Instead, I had been financing my own dismissal. I went to the drawer where I kept important documents and pulled out Richard's will, the insurance policies, the bank statements. It was time to take a careful look at everything. Jessica and James had no idea who they were dealing with. I might be 70, but I was Richard Langston's widow, and he hadn't built his company by being a fool, nor had he married one. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, pulled out my reading glasses, and got to work. The shock was wearing off now, replaced by something colder and more determined. They wanted to put me away? They'd learn soon enough that this old woman still had a few surprises left. 3 days passed before the phone call came. I was in my garden, pruning roses that Richard and I had planted together 15 years ago, when my cell phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen. "Mom?" His voice was tight. "There's some issue with the mortgage check. The bank says it was canceled." I carefully set my pruning shears down. "Is that right? Did you cancel it?" The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. I did. I kept my tone matter of fact. "I've been reviewing my finances." Silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear Jessica in the background pressing for information. "Mom, we were counting on that money. You know our agreement." "I'm aware," I replied, pulling off my gardening gloves one finger at a time. "Things change, James. I need to be more careful with my money these days, for my future care." Another silence, this one heavier. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm 70 years old, James. According to some people, I might need a nursing home soon." The sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. "Can we talk about this? In person?" he finally said. "Of course. Why don't you both come over for dinner tomorrow?" After hanging up, I resumed my gardening, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time since discovering those nursing home searches, I felt in control. The next day, I prepared Richard's famous pot roast recipe. While it cooked, I arranged financial statements across my dining room table, then carefully covered them with a tablecloth. Everything was ready. Jessica arrived first, her smile brittle as she handed me a bouquet of store-bought lilies. "Mary, you look well. We've been so worried." "Have you?" I took the flowers, noting how Jessica's eyes darted around my house, assessing, calculating. "Worried about what exactly?" Before she could answer, James walked in, looking uncomfortable. He hugged me stiffly. "Something smells good, Mom." "Richard's pot roast," I said, watching Jessica's expression sour slightly at my late husband's name. Jessica had always found ways to suggest Richard had been careless with money, that his business decisions hadn't been sound. Little digs that I'd let slide for James's sake. Over dinner, the conversation remained superficial until Jessica set down her fork and fixed me with what I recognized as her concerned look. "Mary, about the mortgage check. James and I are confused. You've always been so reliable." I took a sip of water. "Jessica, when you use my computer, do you always close your browser tabs?" Her face went perfectly still. Beside her, James looked. Between us, confusion evident. "What browser tabs?" he asked. "The ones about nursing homes," I said calmly. "The appointments Jessica scheduled while I was supposed to be visiting my sister next week." Jessica's face flushed. "I was just doing research." "Research?" I echoed. "Mom, what are you talking about?" James turned to Jessica. "What appointments?" Jessica recovered quickly, reaching for James's hand. "I was looking into options, that's all, for the future. Mary's been so forgetful lately, and this house is really too much for her." "Forgetful?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. What have I forgotten, Jessica?" She blinked rapidly. "Well, the other day you couldn't find your glasses." "They were on my head," I finished. "Hardly a sign of dementia." "Nobody said anything about dementia," Jessica snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm just concerned about you living alone." I turned to my son. "James, did you know your wife has been researching nursing homes for me?" James's discomfort was palpable. We've discussed options. For down the road." "Down the road," I repeated. "And were you planning to include me in these discussions about my life?" "Of course," he said quickly, but his eyes slid away from mine. I stood and walked to the dining room table. With deliberate slowness, I removed the tablecloth, revealing the neatly arranged financial documents beneath. "Let's talk about why I canceled that check," I said. "Let's talk about what I've been contributing to this family and what I've been getting in return." Jessica's eyes widened as she stared at the papers. Records of every mortgage payment, every gift, every contribution I'd made since Richard died. "Mary, this is hardly necessary," she began, but I held up my hand. "It is necessary, Jessica. Because I need to understand something." I looked directly at my son. "I need to understand if my own son is planning to put me away so you can have what's left of Richard's money." James's face crumpled. "Mom, no, it's not like that." But in his eyes, I saw something that broke my heart, guilt. And I knew then that whatever Jessica had been planning, my son had known about it. Maybe not everything, but enough. The silence that fell over the dining room was deafening. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. The pot roast, Richard's favorite, sat half-eaten on our plates, growing cold. "This is ridiculous," Jessica said, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You're twisting everything, Mary." James looked between us, his face pale. "Mom, Jessica was just trying to help, to plan ahead. By scheduling tours of nursing homes behind my back?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "By researching how to claim I have dementia?" Jessica's eyes widened. I saw your search history, Jessica." I turned to James. "Did you know about that part? The searches about legal guardianship?" James's expression shifted from defensive to confused. "What?" "Your wife has been researching how to take legal control of my decisions," I explained, watching realization dawn on my son's face. "Apparently, I'm not just old. I'm incompetent." Jessica's composure cracked. "You had no right to go through my personal searches, and you had no right to plan my life without my knowledge," I countered. James stood up, running a hand through his hair, just like Richard used to do when stressed. "Jessica, what is Mom talking about? Guardianship?" Jessica's face flushed. "It was just research, James. Your mother is blowing this out of proportion." "Show him," I said quietly. "What?" "Show him your laptop, the searches, the appointments." I folded my hands on the table. "If it's all innocent research, you shouldn't mind." Jessica laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I don't have to prove anything. This is absurd." "Your mother is manipulating you," she told James, her voice suddenly trembling. "She's always been jealous of our relationship. She resents me for taking her place." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. "Taking my place? As what?" "As the woman in James's life," Jessica's voice rose. "You've never accepted me. You compare everything I do to how Richard would have done it." "That's not true," I said, genuinely surprised by this accusation. "It is true." Jessica's composure was fully gone now. "And now you're trying to turn James against me because I dared to consider options for your care." James held up his hands. "Everyone needs to calm down." "I am calm," I replied, and I was. Seeing Jessica's mask slip gave me a strange sense of validation. "I just want the truth." James turned to Jessica. "Let me see the searches, Jess." Jessica stared at him, incredulous. "You're taking her side?" "I'm not taking sides. I just want to understand what's happening." Jessica's expression hardened. "Fine. You want to see? I'll show you." She stormed out of the dining room, returning moments later with her laptop. She practically slammed it down on the table, opening it with sharp, angry movements. "Here. See? For yourself." She pushed it toward James. "Yes, I looked into care facilities. Because your mother is getting older and this house is too much for her. Because someone had to think about the future." James scrolled through the browser history, his frown deepening. Jess, these searches. How to prove mental incompetence? Asset protection from nursing home costs? Jessica's face paled slightly. I was being thorough. And these emails to Green Valley Estates, he continued, his voice growing harder. Mrs. Langston will not be informed of the visit at this time as we're concerned about her reaction. What the hell, Jessica? You don't understand, Jessica said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Your mother has money, a lot of money, that's just sitting there while we struggle with the mortgage and the kids' college funds. It doesn't make sense. The room went silent. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Finally, the truth. So, this was about Richard's money, I said softly, not about my well-being. That's not fair, Jessica protested, but her voice lacked conviction. James stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Mom's been paying half our mortgage for years. And she can afford it, Jessica snapped. Meanwhile, we're postponing renovations and cutting corners while she sits on a fortune that your father left. That he left to me, I corrected. His wife. James turned to me, his expression pained. Mom, I didn't know about any of this, about the guardianship searches or the secret appointments. But you knew about the nursing home plans, I said. Not as an accusation, but as a fact. He nodded slowly. Jessica mentioned it might be a good idea someday, but not like this. Not behind your back. Not behind her back, Jessica interrupted. We were going to present her with options after we'd done our research. Without consulting me first, I noted. Jessica threw up her hands. Because you're stubborn, because you'd refuse before even considering it. You don't know that, I said. You never asked. James closed the laptop, his movements deliberate. The silence in the room was deafening. I think, he said finally, that we all need some time to cool off. Jessica grabbed her purse. I'm going home. This was a mistake. Jessica, James began. No. I'm done being the villain here. I was trying to plan for our future, all of our futures. She headed for the door, then paused. And Mary? Don't expect any more dinner invitations, since we're all being honest now. The front door slammed behind her. James and I sat in silence for several long moments. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice small. I reached across the table and took his hand. Did you really not know? He shook his head. Not all of it. Not the worst of it. He looked up at me, his eyes, Richard's eyes, filled with shame. But I should have. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Richard died. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy suit I'd worn to board meetings when Richard and I ran the business together. Then I called a cab. First National Bank, please, I told the driver. Inside the bank, I asked to speak with a personal banker. A young woman named Melissa led me to her office. What can I help you with today, Mrs. Langston? I need to review all of my accounts, I said, and make some changes. Over the next hour, I learned that Jessica had indeed been busy. She was listed as an authorized user on one of my credit cards, something I had never approved. Multiple attempts had been made to access my investment accounts using my personal information. This is troubling, Melissa said. Would you like to file a fraud report? I considered it. Not yet, but I want to change everything. Passwords, account numbers, access permissions, and I want to remove any authorization for Jessica or James Langston to access my finances. Melissa nodded. We can certainly do that. Would you like to set up additional security measures? Everything you've got, I replied. By the time I left the bank, I had a new credit card, new account numbers, and a private banker assigned specifically to monitor my accounts for suspicious activity. My next stop was a law office downtown, Martin's. Walsh had been Richard's attorney for 20 years. He greeted me warmly, his handshake firm despite his 80 years. Mary, it's been too long. What brings you in today? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. I need to update my will and power of attorney documents. Martin's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Any particular changes in mind? Yes, I said. I want to remove James as my medical proxy and financial power of attorney. Martin leaned back, studying me. That's a significant change, Mary. May I ask why? I told him everything. The nursing home searches, Jessica's attempts to access my accounts, the canceled mortgage check, and the confrontation. Martin listened without interrupting, his expression growing graver with each detail. When I finished, he sighed. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time I've heard such a story. Elder financial abuse is all too common, even within families. He pulled out a legal pad. Let's get started on those changes. By early afternoon, I had a new will, new power of attorney documents, and a revocable living trust that would protect my assets. I named my nephew Andrew, Robert's son, as my medical proxy and gave him limited financial power of attorney that would only activate if I was medically certified as incompetent by 2 independent physicians. This should protect you, Martin said as I signed the last document. But Mary, what about James? He's still your son. Yes, he is, I replied, feeling a pang in my chest. And I still love him. But I can't trust his judgment as long as Jessica has influence over him. On my way home, I called Robert, my younger son who lived in Colorado. We hadn't spoken in months, partly distance, partly because Jessica had always found ways to downplay the importance of maintaining that relationship. Mom? Robert sounded surprised. Everything okay? Not exactly, I admitted, then gave him the condensed version of recent events. His reaction was immediate. I'm coming out there, this weekend. Robert, you don't need to. I do need to, he insisted. And I should have been checking in more often. After hanging up, I made one more call to Susan, my oldest friend who lived just a few blocks away. We'd grown distant in recent years, another casualty of Jessica's subtle influence. Mary Langston, she answered, her voice warm with familiar affection. To what do I owe this pleasure? Susan, I said, suddenly fighting tears. I could use a friend right now. An hour later, Susan sat at my kitchen table, outrage written across her face as I finished my story. That manipulative little... She stopped herself. I always knew something was off about her. The way she gradually isolated you from everyone, I nodded, realizing how effective Jessica had been. First my friends, then family like Robert, until my world had shrunk to just James and Jessica's family, where Jessica controlled all access and information. What will you do now? Susan asked. Protect myself, I said. And wait. Wait for what? For James to see the truth. I twisted my wedding ring, the one Richard had placed on my finger half a century ago. And in the meantime, I'm taking back my life. Over the next week, I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club at the library, and even signed up for a watercolor class I'd always been interested in. I changed the locks on my house and installed a security system. I made appointments with my doctors for complete physical and cognitive evaluations, documenting my health and mental clarity with official medical records, just in case. James called several times, but our conversations remained superficial. He never mentioned our confrontation or Jessica's scheming. I didn't bring it up either. This was his journey now, his choice to make. 2 weeks after the dinner confrontation, I was deadheading roses in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. I straightened, shielding my eyes against the afternoon sun. Robert stepped out, looking just like his father with his salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. Before I could even set down my gardening shears, he had crossed the lawn and wrapped me in a tight hug. I've missed you, Mom, he whispered against my hair. Over his shoulder, I spotted another car pulling up, James's SUV. My heart tightened as I watched my older son step out alone, his expression unreadable as he observed the reunion. The moment had arrived sooner than I expected. Standing in my garden, embraced by one son while the other approached cautiously, I realized that whatever happened next would change our family forever. Robert and James stood facing each other in my garden, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 2 years, another casualty of the gradual family fracturing that I was only now fully recognizing. "James?" Robert nodded, his hand still protectively on my shoulder. "Robert," James replied, his voice tight. "I didn't know you were coming." "That's become a pattern in this family, hasn't it?" Robert said. "Not knowing things we should." I squeezed Robert's arm gently. "Let's go inside, boys." In the kitchen, the heart of the home where I'd raised them both, my sons sat across from each other at the table that had hosted thousands of family meals. I busied myself making coffee, giving them space to adjust to each other's presence. "Jessica's not with you?" Robert asked, breaking the silence. James shook his head. "We're taking some time apart." My hands stilled on the coffee pot. This was news. "Since when?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Since I found more evidence of what she was planning." Robert leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "After that dinner here," James began, looking at me, "I started paying attention, really paying attention. I found emails on her computer, correspondences with a lawyer about contesting Dad's will. My breath caught. Richard's will had been clear and fair. Everything had been left to me, with provisions for the boys to inherit after my death. There was nothing to contest. She also." James hesitated, shame evident in his expression. "She'd been intercepting your mail, Mom. I found credit card statements, bank notices, all hidden in her desk." "James," I said softly, setting coffee mugs in front of them. "How could you not have noticed what was happening?" He shook his head, unable to meet my eyes. "I trusted her, and I was. Distracted. Work, the kids, our financial problems." He looked up finally. "Problems that wouldn't have existed if I'd managed our money better instead of letting Jessica handle everything." Robert's expression softened slightly. "What kind of problems?" "Debt. A lot of it." James stared into his coffee. "Jessica's been spending beyond our means for years. Even with Mom helping with the mortgage, we're drowning." The pieces were falling into place. Jessica's desperation for access to my money, her scheme to have me declared incompetent, it all stemmed from financial pressures I hadn't known existed. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "Pride," James admitted. "And Jessica convinced me it would only prove we couldn't handle our own affairs." Robert shook his head. "So instead, she plotted to take control of Mom's assets? She thought it was the only way out of the hole we're in." James looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm not defending her. What she did, what she tried to do, it's unforgivable." For the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. My son was seeing the truth at last. "Have you spoken to the children about this?" I asked, thinking of my grandchildren, caught in the middle. James nodded. "Emma's away at college, but she came home last weekend. I told her and Tyler everything. They deserve to know." "How did they take it?" Robert asked. "Better than I expected." "They." James hesitated. "They said they weren't surprised about Jessica. They've seen how she treats you, Mom, when she thinks no one's watching." The revelation stung. Even my grandchildren had noticed what I had been too blind to see. "What happens now?" I asked. James squared his shoulders. "I've contacted a lawyer, not just about Jessica, about everything, our finances, our marriage. I can't trust her anymore." Robert reached across the table and squeezed his brother's arm. the first gesture of solidarity between them in years. "Should have been here," Robert said, looking at me. "I should have seen what was happening." "We all missed the signs," I replied. "Even me." We talked for hours, the three of us. About Richard. About the years since his death. About how Jessica had systematically created distance between us all while projecting the image of the perfect family. As evening approached, Robert suggested we go out for dinner. For the first time in years, I sat at a restaurant with both my sons, watching them reconnect, feeling the broken pieces of our family begin to shift into a new pattern. Over dessert, James cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something else you should know." I set down my fork, bracing myself. I found Jessica's journal. She's been documenting fake incidents, times you supposedly got confused or acted irrationally. She was building a case. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the ice cream in front of me. A case for what? Legal guardianship, James confirmed, his voice low with shame. She was creating a paper trail of alleged cognitive decline. Witnesses, dates, incidents that never happened. Robert's face darkened. "That's criminal." "It's worse than that," I said quietly. "It's a betrayal of the deepest kind." James nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I know. And I was blind to it all." As we drove home, streetlights casting warm pools on the darkening road, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The pain was still there. The shock of betrayal doesn't fade overnight. But something else had grown alongside it. Clarity. Endure. My driveway, both my sons hugged me tightly before departing. Robert to his hotel, James to the new apartment he'd rented. Standing alone on my porch, watching their taillights disappear, I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Inside, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of the boys when they were small, of Richard and me in our prime, of family vacations and Christmas mornings. The family in those faded photographs was gone now, but perhaps something new, something honest, could rise from its ashes. 6 months passed, bringing changes I never could have anticipated. The seasons shifted from summer to winter and back toward spring, nature's reminder that nothing, not even pain, remains forever. James and Jessica's divorce was finalized in December. She fought it bitterly, especially when she realized that James had protected the children's trust funds, money that had come from Richard, from the settlement. In the end, she received the house and a reasonable financial package, but the emotional toll on everyone had been heavy. I watched my son rebuild himself during those months. James started therapy, reconnected with Robert, and spent more time with his children. He moved into a modest apartment near his office and began paying off the substantial debt Jessica had accumulated. We never discussed the mortgage payments I'd made over the years. They remained in the past where they belonged. On a bright April morning, as cherry blossoms dotted the neighborhood with delicate pink, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find James holding a small potted rose bush. "Peace offering," he said with a tentative smile. "For your garden." I stepped aside to let him in. "It's lovely." "The Cecile Brunner variety?" He nodded, pleased I'd recognized it. "Dad always said they were your favorite." We carried the rose to the backyard, where the garden was awakening from winter dormancy. James had come over every other weekend to help maintain it, a silent apology that meant more to me than words. As we dug the hole for the new plant, James wiped his brow and looked at me directly. "I met with Jessica yesterday," he said, "to discuss the kids' summer schedule." I nodded, waiting. "She asked about you," he continued. "Whether you were still angry." He shook his head, as if what happened was just a misunderstanding. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, tamping soil around the young rose. "That you weren't angry or bitter, that you'd moved on." He paused. that you were too busy living your life to waste energy on resentment. I smiled, recognizing my own words reflected back to me. Over these months, I'd often told James that the best revenge was simply to thrive. It's true, I said, standing and brushing dirt from my hands. I am. And I was. My days were full now in ways they hadn't been for years. I'd joined the board of the local arts foundation, something Richard had always encouraged. I was taking those watercolor classes twice a week and had surprised myself with a natural aptitude. I'd rekindled old friendships and forged new ones. Robert visited every other month, sometimes bringing his wife and children. Last Christmas, for the first time in years, my home had been filled with family, genuine family, not the brittle facade that Jessica had crafted. Inside, over lemonade at the kitchen table, James hesitated before pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I have something to ask you," he said. "Emma's graduating next month. She wants you to come to the ceremony and the dinner afterward." "Of course I'll be there," I replied. "I wouldn't miss it." "Jessica will be there too," he added carefully. I set down my glass. "James, I can handle seeing Jessica. I'm not fragile." Relief crossed his face. "I know you're not. It's just, I don't want anything to spoil Emma's day." "It won't," I assured him. Jessica has no power over me anymore. Later that evening, after James had left, I sat on my porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. My phone chimed with a text from Susan, confirming our museum trip. The following day, another message appeared from my book club, reminding me it was my turn to host next week. I scrolled through my calendar. Lunch with Robert's wife when she visited next Tuesday, a foundation meeting on Thursday, watercolor class on Friday. My days were full, purposeful. The phone rang. Emma, my granddaughter, calling from college. "Grandma," she said when I answered, her voice warm. "Dad told me you're coming to graduation." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. I was hoping." She hesitated. "Would you wear Grandpa's silver locket, the one he gave you on your anniversary? I'd like something of his to be there." Tears pricked my eyes. "Of course I will." After we hung up, I went to my jewelry box and found the locket Richard had given me on our 40th anniversary. Inside was a tiny photo of us on our wedding day and another taken just months before his death. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, remembering. Richard would have been proud of how I'd handled everything, not with dramatic confrontations or public accusations, but with quiet dignity and firm resolve. I'd protected myself without becoming bitter, established boundaries without burning bridges that the children and grandchildren would have to navigate. The next morning, I woke to birdsong and gentle spring sunshine. As I moved through my morning routine, coffee on the porch, breakfast with the newspaper, watering the newly planted rose, I felt a profound sense of contentment. My 71st birthday was approaching, and for the first time, I was planning my own celebration, a small dinner, party with the people who truly mattered in my life. Robert and his family would drive in. James and the children would be there. Susan and friends from my various activities had all accepted invitations. There was a certain irony in it all. Jessica and James had been planning to put me away, to diminish my life to the four walls of a care facility and gain control of my assets. Instead, I was more independent and fulfilled than I'd been in years, while Jessica had lost everything that truly mattered. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't exposed Jessica publicly or tried to turn the children against her. I'd simply drawn my boundaries and stood firm. In the end, that quiet strength had been enough. That evening, as spring twilight settled over my garden, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. From the street came the sound of children playing, their laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. A neighbor waved as she walked her dog past my house. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and family. This was victory, not dramatic or vengeful, but profound and lasting. I had lost a daughter-in-law but reclaimed my family. I had faced betrayal but found deeper connections. I had nearly been cast aside, but instead created a life rich with purpose and joy. Jessica had wanted to write the final chapter of my story. Instead, I had picked up the pen myself, authoring a new beginning that no one could take away from me. 2. Sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue. Another day was ending. Another would begin tomorrow, and I would face it on my terms, in my home, surrounded by the life I had built, not despite what had happened, but because of it.